The capital city of Etheria did not sit upon the surface of the planet but hovered 3 miles above it. A sprawling archipelago of diamond glass spires and anti-gravity platforms tethered only by beams of coherent light. From the balcony of the Imperial Palace, the view was a dizzying kaleidoscope of violet and gold. The atmosphere here was artificially thickened and painted by shifting auroras that danced 24 hours a day, a constant reminder that the Zalari Empire bent the very laws of physics to suit its aesthetic whims. Princess Lyriel leaned against the railing, the bioluminescent markings along her collarbone pulsing a soft, irritated indigo. She was 7 feet of elegant, predatory grace, her skin the color of polished obsidian, her eyes swirling like burning nebulae. To the galaxy, she was the jewel of Etheria, a creature of breathtaking beauty and terrifying intellect. To the High Council currently debating her future inside the chamber behind her, she was a problem to be solved. She took a sip of nectar that tasted of electrified honey and listened to the drone of voices. They were discussing her marriage again, or her security. Usually the two topics were indistinguishable. Her attendant, a petite Zalari female named Ilara, fluttered nervously by her side. "High Counselor Varric is in a mood today, Your Highness," Ilara whispered. "He says the unrest in the lower sectors is becoming a tide." Lyra laughed, a sound like chime glass breaking. "Varric calls anything a tide if it threatens to wet his boots. If the people are restless, it is because we float 3 miles above them and drop our refuse on their heads." "Please, Lyra," Ilara hissed, checking the archway. "Do not let them hear you talk like a sympathizer. Not with the assassination rumors." Lyra turned, her long silken robe swirling around her legs. "I am not a sympathizer, Ilara. I am simply bored, and boredom is far more dangerous to this empire than any rebellion." She swept back into the council chamber, the heavy doors parting silently at her approach. The room was a vast rotunda of white marble, dominated by the holographic projection of the galaxy in the center. 12 counselors sat on raised daises, looking down at the center floor. Her father, Emperor Valerius, sat on the highest throne. He looked frail, his once bright skin fading to a dull slate gray, his breathing labored. "Ah, Princess Lyriel?" Counselor Varric boomed. He was a massive specimen, heavily muscled and draped in ceremonial armor that had never seen battle. "So kind of you to join us." "I was counting the auroras, Varric," Lyra said, gliding to her seat. "I found them more illuminating than your report on grain tariffs." A ripple of uneasy laughter went through the younger aides. Varric's jaw tightened. "We were not discussing grain," Varric said, his voice dropping an octave. "We were discussing your survival. The intelligence from the frontier is clear. There are active contracts on your life. The shadow guilds have been paid." Lyra waved a hand dismissively. "The shadow guilds have been paid every week since I was 12. I am still here. My current guards are adequate." "Your current guards are ornamental." Varric slammed a fist onto his podium. "They are Zalari highborn. They are trained for duels of honor, not for stopping a chaotic assault by terrorists who do not care about the rules of engagement. We need to look outside the bloodlines. We need a specialist." The Emperor raised a trembling hand. "Let us see him. Varric, bring in the candidate." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Him? Do tell me we are not hiring a mercenary. I detest the smell of cheap plasma." The great doors at the far end of the chamber groaned open. The court held its breath. Lyra leaned forward, expecting a hulking beast from the brute worlds. Perhaps a 4-armed Gorian or a cyber-enhanced shock trooper. Instead, a human walked in. He was alone. He wore matte black armor that looked scuffed and strictly functional, devoid of the gold filigree that adorned every other uniform in the room. He walked with a fluid, silent gait, stopping exactly in the center of the room. He was tiny, by human standards. Kyle was perhaps average height, maybe 6 feet tall, lean and corded with swimmer's muscle. But in the Hall of Giants, surrounded by Zellari who averaged 7 to 8 feet, he looked like a child. He barely reached the shoulder of the guard standing at the door. A murmur of confusion rippled through the gallery. "Is this a joke?" a duchess whispered loud enough to be heard. Lyra stared at him. She stood up, unfolding her full height, her shadow stretching over him. She walked down the steps of the dais, her movements stalking and deliberate. She circled him, her eyes scanning him from his dusty boots to his short-cropped dark hair. He did not flinch. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead at the Emperor, his face a mask of absolute professional indifference. Lyra stopped directly in front of him. She looked down, exaggerating the angle of her neck. The top of his head barely came to her chin. "This?" Lyra asked, her voice ringing clear and sharp across the silent hall. She looked back at Varric. "You want to entrust the safety of the Imperial heir to this miniature thing?" "Lieutenant Kale is a decorated veteran of the Rim Wars," Varric said, though he sounded defensive. "His record is classified, but it is impeccable." Lyra turned back to Kale. She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She could smell the faint, metallic scent of ozone clinging to him. "Can you even lift a disruption rifle, little soldier?" she teased, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Or do you need a tripod?" Kale remained silent. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, finally flicked up to meet hers. There was no fear in them, no awe, just a flat, calculating assessment that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Lyra felt a spike of annoyance at his lack of reaction. She wanted him to squirm. She wanted him to apologize for his inadequacy. She laughed, a bright, cutting sound that invited the court to join her. "You are too small to be my guard," she declared. The court erupted. Nobles chuckled behind their hands. Guards smirked. It was the verdict of the princess, and in Etheria, ridicule was a weapon as potent as any laser. Kyle did not blink. He waited for the laughter to die down, his expression never shifting. When the silence returned, he spoke. His voice was not booming, but it had a gravelly resonance that carried without effort. "Fortunately, princess," he said, "most threats are not measuring me." The laughter cut off instantly. Lyra blinked. The retort was dry, devoid of insolence but heavy with a strange, weary confidence. It was not the response of a servant. It was the response of someone who knew something she did not. "Insolence," Varric barked. "Truth," the Emperor said softly from his throne. "He is assigned. Lyriel, it is done. He will shadow you at all times. You will not dismiss him. You will not evade him." Lyra glared at her father, then looked back down at Kale. For a second, she saw something flicker in his eyes, not defiance, but a profound, exhausted patience. "Fine," Lyra spat. "Just try not to get stepped on." She spun on her heel and stormed out of the chamber, her robes billowing. She heard the heavy footsteps of her new shadow falling into rhythm behind her. But she did not look back. 2 hours later, Lyra paced the length of her private dressing chambers, throwing a jeweled hair comb across the room. It shattered against the wall. "It is humiliating," she ranted. Ilara was busy picking up the shards, keeping her head down. "A human, Ilara. We conquered them 3 centuries ago, and they are mechanics, farmers, technicians. They are not royal guard material, and did you see him? I could snap him in half with one hand. He seemed Very calm, Alara ventured, placing the broken pieces on a vanity table. He was stiff, Lyra corrected, pouring herself a glass of blue wine. He looked like a statue carved out of granite and bad attitude. Most threats are not measuring me. Who says that to a princess? Lyra slumped onto her chaise lounge, the anger draining away to reveal the cold knot of anxiety she kept hidden beneath her ribs. She took a long drink. They treat me like a piece of furniture, she whispered, her voice losing its theatrical edge. An asset to be guarded, insured, and eventually sold to a suitor from the Proxima systems to secure a trade route. They do not care if I am safe. They care if the asset is undamaged. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, the glowing skin, the perfect symmetry. It felt like a mask she couldn't take off. At least give me a guard who is tall enough to hide behind, she joked crudely, swirling the wine. If the assassins come, what is he going to do? Trip them? She laughed, but the sound was hollow. She remembered the look in the human's gray eyes. He hadn't looked at her rank. He had looked at her throat, her heart, her center of gravity. He had looked at her like a target he was analyzing how to defend. It unsettled her. She was used to being desired or feared. She was not used to being assessed. Deep in the bowels of the palace, far below the floating spires, the air was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen. Kyle stood in a secure briefing room, the walls lined with damp suppression fields. Emperor Valerius stood opposite him. Without the distance of the throne room, the emperor looked ancient. His skin was flaking, his eyes milky with cataracts. She hates you, Valerius said, his voice wheezing. She is young, Kyle replied. He stood at ease, but his muscles were coiled tight. And she is frightened. Fear makes people cruel. She is not just young, Lieutenant. She is the last of the pure bloodline. If she falls, the Council will tear this empire apart into warring fiefdoms. Billions will die. Valerius stepped closer, his hand shaking as he reached out to touch the breastplate of Kale's armor. The Council thinks you are just a skilled soldier, Valerius whispered. Varric thinks you are a political compromise. They do not know about Project Aegis. They do not know what is inside you. Kale's jaw tightened. He could feel the hum of the interface beneath his skin, a web of dormant fire laced through his nervous system. It was a cold, alien sensation that never went away. I am stable, Your Majesty, Kale said. The interface is holding. It was recovered from the Void War, Valerius said, his eyes wandering to the past. Tech that should not exist. A fusion of biology and mechanics that responds to will, to desperation. You are my last insurance policy, Kale. You are the knife hidden in the sleeve. I know my orders. Do you? Valerius gripped Kale's shoulder with surprising strength. Your orders are not just to kill assassins. The threat is not just outside the walls. The Council, my own advisors, they hunger for power. If the coup comes, it will come from within. Kyle looked at the old alien's hand on his shoulder. I will keep her breathing, sir, no matter who tries to stop it. Even if it is her, Valerius said darkly. Lyra has a good heart, but she is reckless. She will try to lose you. She will try to provoke you. Do not let her. I don't provoke easily. Good. The Emperor stepped back, coughing into a silk handkerchief. It came away spotted with blue blood. Go. The diplomatic ball is tonight. The vultures will be circling. Make sure they do not bite. Kale saluted and turned to leave. As he walked down the corridor, he flexed his right hand. Beneath the skin of his palm, faint. Geometric lines glowed silver for a fraction of a second before fading. He hated the power. He hated what it cost him to use it. But for the girl with the burning eyes who had laughed at him, he suspected he would have to use it all. The grand atrium was a masterwork of Zilari architecture. The floor was a single sheet of transparent hyperglass, offering a terrifying view of the clouds swirling 3 miles below. To walk on it was to walk on the sky. 500 guests filled the hall, a sea of velvet robes, shimmering armor, and jeweled masks. The music was a liquid, multi-tonal symphony generated by floating orbs that drifted above the dancers. Lyra stood near the edge of the dance floor, holding a flute of sparkling nectar she didn't want. She wore a gown of woven light fabric that shifted color from deep violet to angry crimson depending on her mood. Currently, it was a moody plum. Kale stood 3 paces behind her. He had cleaned his armor, but he still looked like a smudge of charcoal in a room full of diamonds. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the crowd in a grid pattern. "You are hovering," Lyra said without turning around. "I am guarding," Kale corrected. "You are scaring the suitors away." "You are welcome." Lyra suppressed a smile. He was quick. She had to give him that. "Do you dance, soldier?" she asked, swirling her drink. "Or is that too complex a maneuver for your species?" "I know the steps, princess, but I prefer to keep my feet on the ground." "Boring," she sighed. "You are tragically boring." She pushed off the railing and waded into the crowd. A tall, golden-skinned duke from the southern reach intercepted her, bowing low. Lyra forced a smile, accepting his hand. As they spun onto the glass floor, she glanced back. Kale was moving along the perimeter, matching her pace perfectly, his gaze never locking on her face but always on the space around her. The music swelled to a crescendo. The floating orbs pulsed with light. Then, the sound skipped. It was a jarring digital stutter. The smooth harmony fractured into a screech of static. Lyra faltered in her step. The Duke frowned. "A technical malfunction, how droll." The lights overhead flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness save for the ambient glow of the auroras outside. A low, thrumming vibration began to shake the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," a mechanical voice boomed over the speakers, distorted and deep. "Gravity stabilization failing." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The grand atrium relied on active gravity plating to keep the guests on the floor. Without it, "Get down!" Kale's voice cut through the confusion, sharp as a whip crack. Before Lyra could react, the world turned upside down. The gravity generators didn't just fail, they reversed. With a collective scream, 500 guests were hurled upward. The wine in Lyra's glass flew out in a perfect sphere of liquid. The Duke released her hand, flailing as he shot toward the vaulted ceiling 50 feet above. Lyra screamed as her feet left the glass. She was weightless. Then falling up. The ceiling was a mosaic of jagged crystal chandeliers and stone arches. If she hit it at this speed, she would be crushed. "Lyra!" She saw her Zilari guards, massive and armored, tumbling helplessly through the air, their limbs flailing, their heavy weapons useless as they smashed into the upper support beams. But Kale was not tumbling. He was moving. He was running across the glass floor as if gravity still held him, but his boots were not touching the surface. He was skating on thin air, his body angled low, propelling himself off falling debris, a table, a floating servant, a dropped shield. Lyra was 10 feet off the ground and rising fast. Kyle launched himself from a floating statue, a blur of black motion. He collided with her in midair. The impact knocked the breath out of her. His arm clamped around her waist like an iron band. "Hold on!" he gritted out. He twisted his body, orienting them so his back was to the ceiling. But they were not going to hit the ceiling. The gravity shifted again, violently sideways. The entire room became a blender. Guests were thrown against the walls, A massive crystal chandelier detached and came hurtling toward them like a spear. Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. It never came. A sound like a thunderclap echoed next to her ear, a deep, resonant thrum. She opened her eyes. The chandelier had stopped. It hung suspended in the air 3 feet from their faces, caught in a shimmering, translucent distortion field. The glass shards were vibrating, frozen in space. She looked at Kyle. His eyes were no longer gray. They were glowing with a fierce, silver-blue light, bright enough to illuminate the terror on her face. Veins of white light traced up his neck from his armor, pulsing in time with the strange distortion sound. He wasn't just holding her. He was anchoring the reality around them. "Stay close," he commanded. His voice sounded different, layered, harmonic, as if 2 people were speaking at once. He reached out his free hand. The air in front of him rippled. The massive chandelier was swept aside as if it were made of paper, smashing into the far wall. The gravity fluctuated again, slamming them downward toward the glass floor. The floor was covered in shattered goblets and debris. Kale spun her, pulling her against his chest, shielding her head with his hand. As they plummeted, a sphere of energy blossomed around them, a bubble of kinetic force. They hit the floor, but there was no bone-shattering crunch. The energy field absorbed the impact, dispersing it in a wave of blue light that cleared the glass around them. For a moment, in the center of the chaos, there was stillness. Lyra lay pressed against him, her cheek against the cold plating of his armor. She could feel his heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic, terrifyingly fast rhythm, like a hummingbird's wings. She felt the heat radiating from him, a fever heat that seeped through the metal. His hand was pressed to the small of her back, and even through the layers of fabric, the contact felt electric, intimate, and shockingly protective. She looked up. The silver light in his eyes was fading, retracting like a dying star. The glowing veins on his neck dimmed and vanished. He looked down at her, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He breathed in ragged gasps. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal gravelly pitch. Lyra stared at him, her mouth dry. She had seen Zalari psychic monks move small objects. She had seen industrial lifters. She had never seen a human bend physics with his will. "What are you?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the emergency lights slammed on, bathing the room in harsh red. The gravity stabilized with a lurch. Medical teams and security forces burst through the doors, shouting orders. The spell broke. Kyle immediately released her and scrambled back, putting 2 feet of distance between them. He stood up, smoothing his armor, his posture shrinking back into the unassuming, small guard he had been 10 minutes ago. Lyra sat up, shaking glass from her skirts. Her towering Zalari guards were groaning on the floor, nursing broken limbs. The Duke was unconscious near the wall. Only the human was standing. A medic rushed to Lyra. "Your Highness, are you injured?" "The gravity stabilizers. A catastrophic malfunction." Lyra waved the medic away, her eyes still locked on Kale. He was checking his wrist console, ignoring her stare. "It was not a malfunction," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "That was an attack." Varric came striding through the debris, flanked by heavy troopers. He looked unruffled, though his cape was torn. "A tragic accident, Princess," Varric announced loudly, addressing the room. "The atmospheric storms caused a surge in the grid. It is under control." "Accident?" Lyra stood up, her legs shaking. She pointed at the chandelier that had been thrown across the room. "The gravity shifted 3 times. Someone hacked the core." "You are in shock. Lyriel?" Varric said dismissively. He glanced at Cale. The counselor's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in the human standing amidst the devastation without a scratch. "Lieutenant, you survived." "Luck, sir," Cale said. His face was blank. "I fell near a support pillar." Lyra looked at Cale sharply. He was lying. He was lying to the High Counselor. "Luck," Varric repeated slowly. "Indeed." "We need to get the princess to a secure location," Cale said, stepping between Lyra and Varric. It was a subtle move, but Lyra noticed it. He was cutting the counselor's line of sight. "Of course," Varric smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Take her to the royal wing. We will investigate this malfunction." Cale ushered Lyra toward the exit. As they walked through the ruined hall, stepping over broken glass and groaning courtiers, Lyra leaned in close to him. "You pushed that chandelier," she hissed. "I saw you. Your eyes." "Reflection of the emergency lights. Princess," Cale said, staring straight ahead. "Don't lie to me, Cale. I felt it. The heat. The energy." He stopped. They were in the corridor now, out of earshot of the others. He turned to her. He was still shorter than her, still looked small and unimpressive in his scuffed armor. But Lyra couldn't see him that way anymore. She remembered the feeling of being anchored, of being the only solid thing in a world that had lost its gravity. "Princess," he said softly, "if you want to stay alive, you saw nothing. You felt nothing. I'm just a small human guard who got lucky." "Why?" she demanded. "Because," he said. And for the first time, a crack of genuine emotion showed in his face, a mixture of fear and grim determination. "Because if they know what I can do, they will not just try to kill you. They will try to take me apart to see how I work." Lyra stared at him. She thought of her mockery in the throne room. "You are too small to be my guard." She realized with a jolt of cold clarity that everyone in that room, including herself, had been wrong. He wasn't too small. He was a loaded weapon walking around with the safety off. "Who are they?" Lyra asked. "Everyone who isn't us," Cale replied. He turned and began walking down the hall. "Coming, Your Highness? It's a long walk to the safe room." Lyra hesitated, looking back at the ruined ballroom where Varric was speaking in hushed tones with two other counselors who had arrived conveniently late. She saw the glances they exchanged. She saw the way they looked at the ceiling, checking the damage, not with horror, but with calculation. She turned back to the human soldier. "I'm coming," she said. She fell into step beside him. She didn't make a joke about his height. She didn't tease him about his stride. For the first time in her life, Princess Lyriel walked down the halls of her own palace and realized that the only thing standing between her and the abyss was the small man walking quietly at her side. The assignment to Vexarion was presented as a diplomatic honor. But Lyriel knew exactly what it was, an exile wrapped in silk. The High Council chamber was stiflingly polite as Varric laid out the itinerary. The mining colonies on the frontier were restless, he explained with a serpent smile. They needed to see the face of the future empress. They needed reassurance that the core worlds had not forgotten them. It was a classic political maneuver. Get the disruptive princess out of the capital while the adults rearranged the furniture of the empire. Lyra stood on the private landing pad of the crystal spire, the wind whipping her ceremonial robes around her legs. The royal yacht, the Gilded Hawk, sat gleaming on the platform, a sleek teardrop of silver and glass that looked more like jewelry than a starship. "A goodwill tour," she muttered to the wind, her voice dripping with acid. "To a rock that smells of sulfur and rebellion. The sulfur is actually quite mild in the upper atmosphere," a dry voice said behind her. It is the heavy metals in the water you have to watch out for. Lyra turned. Cale was standing at the base of the ramp, checking the charge on a plasma rifle that looked comically large in his hands. He was dressed in a standard-issue environmental combat suit, matte gray and scuffed, which stood in stark contrast to the polished hull of the yacht. "Ah," Lyra said, putting on her brightest, falsest smile. "My tiny hero returns. I am surprised Varric let you come. I would have thought he wanted a guard who could at least see over the crowd." Cale didn't look up from the weapon. Counselor Varric insisted on a small footprint for the security detail. Low profile, less likely to provoke the locals. "And you are certainly low profile," Lyra said, stepping closer. She towered over him, her shadow engulfing his frame. "Tell me, Lieutenant, do you need a booster seat for the jump seats? I can have the staff bring a cushion." Cale finally looked up. His gray eyes were flat, absorbing her mockery without reflecting it back. "I will manage, Princess. If the G-force is too much, I will just hold on to your ankles." Lyra blinked, caught off guard. A flush of irritation rose in her neck. He did it every time, absorbed the insult and returned it with a deadpan practicality that made her sound petty. "Just stay out of the way," she snapped, sweeping past him up the ramp. "And try not to look so military. You are ruining the aesthetic." The interior of the Gilded Hawk was a palace in miniature. The main cabin was lined with white velvet and gold-veined marble. A gravity-stabilized fountain played in the center of the room. It was absurd. It was beautiful. It was everything the miners on Vexarian hated. As the ship lifted off, breaking the atmosphere and sliding into the dark velvet of space, Lyra sat in the observation lounge, watching Etheria shrink to a glowing jewel. She felt a pang of fear she would never admit to. She was leaving the only home she had known for a world that wanted her dead, protected by a man she didn't trust. Kyle stood by the bulkhead, scanning the internal sensors. He looked out of place against the velvet, a stain of reality on a canvas of fantasy. "You are pacing," Lyra said, not turning from the window. "I am standing still, Princess. You are vibrating. It is annoying." She spun her chair around. "Relax, soldier. We are in a royal yacht on a hyperlane reserved for the nobility. The only danger out here is dying of boredom." Kyle tapped a command into his wrist console. "Complacency is usually the first casualty. Your Highness, the hyperlane is secure, but the destination is not. Vexarian is a powder keg. Lord Draxon runs that planet like a private fiefdom." "I can handle Draxon," Lyra said, waving a hand. "He is just another greedy noble. Flatter his ego. Promise him a tax break, and he will purr like a kitten. Draxon is a warlord who skins his enemies and hangs them from the mining rigs." Kale said quietly. "He does not purr." Lyra stiffened. "You speak very freely for a guard." "I speak freely for a human," Kale corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. "Because I do not have the luxury of pretending the universe is polite. You see politics. Princess, I see trajectories. And right now, we are flying straight into a wall. And I suppose you are the one to catch me?" Lyra laughed, leaning forward. "With what? Those little arms? You are a biological curiosity. Kyle, a diversity hire. Do not mistake your presence here for necessity." Kyle opened his mouth to retort, but a sudden silent vibration on his wrist stopped him. He glanced down. The display on his gauntlet flashed a sequence of red glyphs. It was not a standard comms frequency. It was a hardline encryption bypassing the ship's systems entirely. Directive update. Bloodline secure. Prepare for Protocol Omega. Activation pending. Kyle went rigid. He knew that code. It was the Aegis override, the kill switch, or the leash. "What is it?" Lyra asked, noticing the shift in his posture. "Bad news from the nursery?" Kyle covered the display with his other hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. The message implied two things. First, that someone knew exactly where they were, and second, that his role as a protector was about to become something much more complicated. He felt the nanotech in his spine itch, a phantom heat that warned of a rising surge. "Just a diagnostic," Kale lied, his voice tight. "Suit telemetry." Lyra narrowed her eyes. She was observant. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hand curled into a fist. "You are a terrible liar, Kale. For a species known for deception, you are remarkably transparent." "We should return to our seats," Kale said, moving toward the cockpit door. "We are approaching the jump point. Do not order me." The ship lurched. It wasn't the smooth transition of hyperdrive engagement. It was a violent, tearing shudder, as if a giant hand had grabbed the hull and shook it. The gravity stabilizers screamed and died. Lyra was thrown from her chair, slamming into the velvet wall. The fountain exploded, sending water and marble shrapnel flying across the cabin. "Status!" Kale roared, no longer the quiet guard. He was moving before the debris settled, scrambling across the tilting floor toward the cockpit. "My pilot!" Lyra gasped, trying to stand as the floor angled 45 degrees. "Check the pilot!" Kyle punched the door override. The cockpit blast doors hissed open, and the air was sucked out of the lounge with a deafening whoosh. The cockpit was gone. A jagged tear in the hull had sheared off the front 10 feet of the ship. The pilot, the navigation console, the nose of the yacht, all of it was just gone, replaced by the swirling, chaotic kaleidoscope of a fractured hyperlane. Kale slammed his hand onto the emergency seal, the blast doors grinding shut just as the decompression threatened to pull them both into the void. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the screaming of proximity alarms. The pilot. Lyra stared at the closed door, her face draining of bioluminescence until she was a pale gray. "He is dead," Kale said. He didn't offer comfort. He was already at the auxiliary engineering console, his fingers flying over the hard light keys. The navigation computer was in the nose. "We are blind, and we are dropping out of hyperspace in the middle of nowhere." The ship groaned, metal shrieking as it twisted under extreme stress. "Do something!" Lyra shouted, panic finally cracking her composure. She grabbed Kale's shoulder, her nails digging into the armor. "You are the guard! Guard me!" Kale spun on her. He didn't bow. He grabbed her wrists and pinned them to her sides, his grip shocking in its strength. "If you want to live, listen to me." He snarled. His voice was low, dangerous, and completely devoid of deference. "Sit down. Strap in. Shut up. Now!" Lyra stared at him. The command hit her like a physical blow. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Fear and a strange electric thrill shot through her. She nodded, mute, and scrambled into the nearest crash couch, buckling the harness with shaking hands. "Nav systems down," Kyle muttered to himself, his eyes darting across the readouts. "Thrusters offline. We are caught in a gravity well. A moon. Uncharted." He looked at the controls. They were locked out, the sabotage deep in the code. The stick was dead in his hands. "I cannot fly it," he said. "What?" Lyra screamed. "You are a soldier." "The controls are severed." Kale looked at the console, then at his own hands. He took a breath that rattled in his chest. "I cannot fly it. I have to become it." He ripped the glove off his right hand. He slammed his palm onto the exposed interface panel of the engineering deck. Don't look, he warned. Lyra looked. She watched as the skin of his arm seemed to dissolve. Silver filaments erupted from his flesh, slithering like liquid mercury into the console. The veins in his neck lit up, glowing with a brilliant, harsh blue light that illuminated the dark cabin. His back arched, a guttural sound of pain tearing from his throat. The ship shuddered, and then the lights changed. The red emergency strobes turned a calm, steady blue, the same blue as Cale's eyes. "Interface active," Cale's voice said, but it didn't come from his mouth. It came from the ship's speakers, overlaid with a digital harmonic. "Override initiated." Lyra pressed herself back into the seat, eyes wide. The man in front of her was gone. He was a conduit. His small body was trembling, sweat pouring down his face, but the ship was stabilizing. The thrusters fired in short, controlled bursts, guided not by a computer but by his nervous system. He was the core of the machine when it was terrifying, when it was grotesque, and it was the most intimate thing she had ever seen. A man stripping away his humanity to become a shield. "Brace!" the ship voice boomed. Through the viewport, a swirling green storm filled the sky. Jagged mountains of black glass rushed up to meet them. The impact was a series of brutal, grinding crashes. The Gilded Hawk skipped off a ridge, sheared off a wing, and plowed into a valley of volcanic ash. The world dissolved into noise and violence, and then darkness. Lyra woke to the sound of hissing rain. She was hanging upside down in her harness. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and rotten eggs. "Kyle," she croaked. "Here." The voice was weak. She turned her head. Kyle was slumped against the engineering console, the silver filaments retracting slowly back into his skin, leaving angry red welts behind. He looked exhausted, drained of color. He unbuckled his harness and dropped to the deck, stumbling as he tried to stand. "Atmosphere is toxic," he rasped, checking his wrist. "High acidity, heavy electrical storms. We have hull breaches everywhere." Lyra fumbled with her buckle and fell to the floor. She tried to activate her personal royal shield, a shimmering field that usually protected her from rain and dirt. But the emitter on her belt just sparked and died. "My shield," she said, tapping it. "It is broken." Kale looked at her. "Everything is broken, Princess. The escort is gone. The pilot is dead. And we are on a moon that wants to dissolve us." He tapped a sequence on his chest plate. His black armor hummed, and a faint, translucent bubble expanded outward from him, creating a perimeter of clean air about 2 meters in diameter. "My field generator is intact," he said, "but it is tactical, short range." He looked at her, then at the gaping hole in the side of the hull where the acid rain was already eating into the velvet carpet. "You have to stay close to me," he said. "Inside the bubble. If you step out, your lungs will burn in 3 minutes." Lyra looked at the small space around him. It was a cage of intimacy. "Fine," she whispered. They scrambled out of the wreckage into a nightmare. The landscape was a jagged hellscape of obsidian rock and glowing green pools of sludge. The sky was a bruising purple, lit by constant, silent flashes of lightning. "We need to move," Kale shouted over the wind. "The ship is sinking into the ash. If the reactor goes, it will take this whole valley with it." "Move where?" Lyra shouted back, struggling to keep her footing on the slick glass. Her elaborate robes were already torn, the hem sizzling where it touched the ground. "There," Kale pointed to a ridgeline in the distance. "I picked up a weak signal before the sensors died. A beacon, maybe an old relay station." They began to walk. It was a brutal, forced march. Lyra was taller, her stride longer, but she was unaccustomed to uneven terrain. She slipped constantly, her soft boots finding no purchase on the razor-sharp rocks. Cale moved with a grim efficiency, but he had to constantly slow down, waiting for her, keeping the protective bubble centered on them both. "You are too slow," he muttered after the third time she stumbled. "I am not dressed for hiking in hell," Lyra snapped. "And stop pulling me. I am not a dog on a leash." "Then stop trying to die," Kyle retorted. "No, if you fall behind, you melt. It is simple math." "You are enjoying this," she accused, breathless. "Seeing the princess in the mud?" "I am enjoying breathing," Cale said. "I would like to keep doing it." They reached a narrow ravine. A river of molten slurry churned 50 feet below. The only way across was a natural bridge of slick, black rock, barely 3 feet wide. "Ladies first," Kyle offered, though his eyes were scanning the sky. The clouds were darkening. A surge was coming. Lyra looked at the bridge. Her stomach turned. "I cannot." "You can. Just don't look down. I will fall. I will catch you." "You are too small to catch me," she said, the old joke falling flat in the toxic air. Cale stepped closer. He grabbed her hand. His grip was hard, calloused. "I caught a falling starship. Lyra, I can catch you. Now move!" She stepped onto the bridge. The wind howled, trying to push her into the abyss. She focused on Cale's back, on the matte black armor plates. He moved steadily, a solid anchor in a shifting world. They were halfway across when the storm surge hit. A wall of wind and green lightning slammed into the ravine. The bridge shook. Lyra lost her footing. Her boot slid on the wet glass, and she pitched sideways toward the drop. "Cale!" He didn't hesitate. He spun, dropping to one knee to lower his center of gravity, and lunged, his hand clamped onto her forearm. He didn't just hold her. He yanked her back with a strength that defied his size, pulling her violently away from the edge. Momentum carried them both into the cliff face on the other side. Cale slammed into the rock, taking the impact with his armor, and Lyra slammed into him. He pinned her there, pressing her flat against the stone wall to shield her from the wind. The protective bubble shrank, responding to the stress of the storm, until it was barely skin-tight around the two of them. They were crushed together. Lyra's chest heaved against his breastplate. Her face was inches from his. Their helmets bumped with a soft clack. She stared into his eyes. They were wide, the pupils blown, adrenaline flooding his system. She could feel his breath, ragged and hot, in the small space between them. The storm raged outside the bubble, a chaotic swirl of noise, but inside, in the sudden stillness of their proximity, the silence was deafening. She felt the hardness of his body, the unyielding durability of him. She realized with a sudden, confusing rush of heat that he wasn't just a tool. He was a man, a dangerous, capable man who had just saved her life for the second time in 24 hours. His hand was still gripping her arm, his fingers digging in. He didn't let go. His gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back up to her eyes. "Are you?" he started, his voice rough. "I am intact," she whispered. She didn't pull away. She wanted to lean in. The urge was irrational, insane. They were dying on a poison moon, and all she could think about was the heat radiating from his neck. Kyle swallowed hard. He slowly released her arm, but he didn't step back. He couldn't. The field was too small. "The storm is passing," he said, looking over her shoulder. "We need to find shelter before nightfall. The temperature will drop to absolute zero." He turned away, and the moment broke. But the ghost of it lingered, a static charge that made Lyra's skin prickle. They found an escape pod from the yacht's wreckage half buried in a snowbank of frozen ash. It was little more than a crushed tin can, but the hull was intact. They crawled inside. It was freezing. The life support systems were dead. "We cannot sleep," Kyle said, curling his legs up to fit in the cramped space. "If we sleep, we freeze." Lyra hugged her knees, shivering violently. Her bioluminescence had gone dark, her body conserving every ounce of energy. I can't stop shaking." Kyle looked at her. He hesitated, waging a visible war with his training. "Come here," he said finally. "What?" "My interface," he explained, his voice clinical but his eyes avoiding hers. "It generates waste heat, thermal regulation. If we link, if I expand the biofield, I can keep your core temperature up." Lyra didn't argue. She crawled across the small floor space. Kyle adjusted his position. Opening his arms, she settled against him, her back to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight. It was awkward at first, rigid, but the cold was merciless. "I need to synchronize," Kyle murmured. "It might feel strange." He rested his chin on the top of her head. Lyra felt a hum start in his chest, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through his armor and into her spine. Then, the world shifted. It wasn't just heat. It was him. The neural link of his interface, designed to bond with weapon systems, was looking for a connection. It found her nervous system. Lyra gasped. Suddenly, she wasn't just feeling the cold pod. She was feeling the ache in Kale's left knee. She was feeling the phantom itch of the nanotech in his blood. And she felt his memories. They flickered at the edge of her mind like strobe lights. A muddy trench on a rain-soaked world. The smell of burning plasma. A faceless officer shouting orders. "Hold the line. You are expendable. Hold the line." She felt the recoil of a rifle, the sickening thud of a body falling, the crushing, hollow loneliness of a barracks room where no one spoke to the monster from Project Aegis. She felt his fear, not for himself, but for her. "She is too bright," his mind whispered, a thought that wasn't hers. "She burns like a star. I am just the moth." Lyra stiffened. He could feel her too. "Kyle," she whispered. "Sorry," he groaned, his voice tight with effort. "Shielding is difficult. Just focus on the warmth." Lyra relaxed into him. She reached down and found his hand where it rested on her ribs. She interlaced her long, slender fingers with his scarred ones. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't answer. "For someone so small," she murmured, a sleepy smile touching her lips. "You take up a lot of space in my head." She felt his chest hitch, a low, rumbling sound. He was laughing. It wasn't the dry, sarcastic chuckle she was used to. It was genuine. "Quiet. You are heavy, princess," he whispered back. "Go to sleep. I have the watch." The terror of the crash faded. The toxic wind howled outside, but inside the pod, wrapped in the arms of a human guard, Lyra felt safer than she had ever felt in her tower of crystal. Dawn broke with a pale, sickly yellow light. They dug themselves out of the pod, stiff and sore. The neural link had faded with the waking mind, leaving only a lingering sense of empathy, like the memory of a vivid dream. They followed the beacon signal for another hour, climbing a steep ridge until they found it. It wasn't just a beacon. It was an abandoned surveyor station, half buried in the rock. The airlock was rusted, but Kale pried it open with a pry bar from his survival kit. Inside, the air was stale but breathable. Kale moved immediately to the console, bypassing the dead power cells with a jump charge from his suit battery. The screens flickered to life. "Logs," Kale muttered, his fingers flying. "Let's see who left the light on." He pulled up the station's passive sensors. They had recorded the crash of the Gilded Hawk. They had also recorded the telemetry of the ship in the moments before the hyperlane fracture. Here, Cale pointed. The navigation error. It wasn't a glitch. Lyra leaned over his shoulder. What is that code? It is a remote override command, Cale said, his voice cold. Sent from the Etheria relay network. He traced the digital signature. It unspooled across the screen. Authorization key, Royal Protocol 7 Alpha. Lyra stopped breathing. 7 Alpha, she repeated. That is a familial code. Who has access? Cale asked, turning to look at her. My father, Lyra said, her voice trembling. And the High Council. And my aunt, Chancellor Serexa. Cale stared at the screen. They didn't just want you gone, Lyra. They wanted you erased. An accident in deep space. No body to bury. No martyr to mourn. Lyra backed away from the console. The betrayal was a physical pain, sharp and deep. Her own blood, her own family. We have a shuttle, Kyle said, looking at the manifest. Old rusty, but the specs say it is atmospheric capable, short-range jump only. We can go back, Lyra said, her voice hollow. We can limp back to the capital. Tell my father. Kyle looked at her. If we go back now, without proof, without allies, we are dead the moment we enter orbit. Whoever ordered this thinks you are already Ash. Lyra looked at the rusty shuttle sitting in the hangar bay on the security feed. She looked at Cale, the man who had kept her alive with his own body heat. She thought of the miners on Vexarion, the people she was supposed to be touring like a zoo exhibit. If the Council was willing to kill an imperial princess to secure power, what were they doing to the people who had no names? A cold, hard resolve settled over her. She straightened her spine. The flippant, bored girl from the ballroom was gone. No, Lyra said. Kyle raised an eyebrow. No. We are not going home, Lyra said. She walked to the hangar controls. The mission was to go to Vexarion. So we are going to Vexarion. Princess, Kyle warned, stepping in front of her. Vexarion is a war zone. You have no guards, no money, no influence. You are walking into the lion's den. I am the lion Kyle, she said, her eyes flashing with the nebular fire that marked her bloodline. They tried to kill me. They failed. Now I am going to find out why. She looked up at him. Are you with me? Or is this where your orders end? Cale looked at the woman standing in the ruins of the station. Her dress was shredded. Her face was smeared with soot, and she looked more royal than she ever had on the throne. He felt the directive on his wrist, Protocol Omega. He was supposed to contain her, control her. He looked at the shuttle, then he looked at her. He realized with a jolt that he didn't care about the orders anymore. My orders are to protect you, Kyle said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips. If you want to go kick a hornet's nest, I suppose I have to hold the stick. Lyra grinned. It was a fierce, wild thing. Good, she said. Load up, tiny guard. We have an empire to save. The stolen shuttle was a rusted bucket of bolts that smelled of old coolant and unwashed flight suits. A far cry from the velvet-lined luxury of the Gilded Hawk. But it had one advantage. It was invisible to the long-range scanners of Vexarion. Princess Lyriel sat in the co-pilot seat, staring out the scratched viewport as the planet filled the glass. She had grown up surrounded by the pristine, curated beauty of Etheria, where the air was scented with jasmine and the architecture defied gravity. Vexarion was a punch in the gut. It was a world flayed alive. The surface was a bruised landscape of gray rock and open pit mines that glowed with toxic yellow runoff. Massive ore spires, stripped of their natural crust. rose like skeletal fingers clawing at the smog-choked sky. The cities were not gleaming capitals, but parasitic growths of neon and durasteel clinging to the sides of cliffs, connected by dripping pipelines and suspended rail systems. "It is ugly," Lyra whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Kyle guided the shuttle through the atmospheric turbulence, his hands steady on the yoke. "It is industrious, Princess. This is where your crystal spires come from. They dig the silicates here, refine them in the acid pits, and ship them up so the council can have nice windows." Lyra looked at him. He was focused on the descent, his profile illuminated by the harsh orange glow of the instrument panel. There was no accusation in his voice, just a flat statement of fact that stung worse than any insult. "You have been here before," she stated. "Once," Kale said, initiating the landing sequence. "To put down a labor riot 3 years ago. We didn't stay long. Just long enough to remind them who owns the oxygen." Lyra swallowed hard, turning back to the view. The guilt was a new sensation, sitting heavy in her stomach like a stone. They landed on a private platform jutting out from the governor's palace, a fortress of black iron perched precariously over the largest mining pit. The air outside the shuttle was thick and tasted of metal. A reception committee was waiting. Lord Draxon was a man of excessive appetites. He was a Zalari, but he lacked the ethereal grace of the capital nobility. He was broad, his skin a mottled, unhealthy gray, and he wore a suit of powered exoskeleton armor that was clearly more for intimidation than function, gilded with tacky gold filigree. "Her Royal Highness," Draxon boomed as Lyra descended the ramp, his voice amplified by the suit's speakers. He spread his arms wide, the servos whining. "We were told to expect a standard inspection team, not the jewel of the Empire herself. What an unexpected honor." Lyra smoothed the front of her scavenged flight suit. She had managed to clean the soot from her face, but she looked nothing like the immaculate princess of the Holos. Still, she raised her chin, channeling centuries of royal breeding. The shuttle suffered a mechanical failure, Lord Draxon. Lyra lied smoothly, her voice carrying over the roar of the mining machinery below. "We decided to proceed rather than delay. The Emperor values punctuality." Draxon's eyes, small and black like beads of oil, flicked over her, then settled on Kale, who stood a pace behind her, his hand resting casually near his sidearm. Draxon sneered. It was a subtle curling of his lip, but it spoke volumes. "And you brought security," Draxon said, stepping closer to loom over Kale. The warlord was nearly 8 feet tall in his armor. Kale looked like a child beside him. "Though I must say, the budget cuts in the capital must be severe if this is what passes for a royal guard these days." The entourage of sycophants and advisors chuckled. Draxon leaned down, his faceplate sliding open to reveal a row of sharpened teeth. "He is a bit small, isn't he, Your Highness? Like a pocket-sized pet? Do you keep him in your purse?" Lyra felt a flash of heat go up her neck. It was the same joke she had made 1,000 times. She had called him small. She had called him a toy. But hearing it from this man, with his oily voice and his cruel eyes, made her blood boil. She stepped forward, placing herself between Draxon and Kale. "Lieutenant Kale is not a pet, Lord Draxon," Lyra said, her voice ice-cold and sharp enough to cut glass. "He is a precision instrument. You prefer bludgeons, I see, large, noisy, and overcompensating for a lack of structural integrity." She gestured vaguely at Draxon's oversized codpiece. The laughter in the entourage died instantly. A few aides looked away, hiding smiles. Draxon straightened up, his face darkening to a bruised purple. "I merely meant—" "I know what you meant," Lyra cut him off. But be warned, my guard may be compact, but so is a neutron grenade. I would advise against pulling the pin. She swept past him toward the palace doors, not waiting for a response. Kale fell into step behind her. He didn't say a word, but as they passed through the airlock, she caught his reflection in the glass. His expression was unchanged, but there was a tightness around his eyes that had softened. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. The inspection was a farce. Draxon led them through sanitized corridors and observation decks where hand-picked miners in clean uniforms waved enthusiastically. But Lyra was not the naive girl who had left Etheria. She had survived a crash landing. She knew what desperation looked like. She noticed the way the miners' hands shook. She saw the fresh bruises on the wrists of the serving staff. She saw the fear in their eyes when Draxon raised his voice in a private conference room, while Draxon was distracted by a call from his bankers. Lyra slipped away to the lower viewing gallery. Kale shadowed her. She found a group of shift supervisors waiting for transport. They looked exhausted, their skin stained permanently with soot. "Excuse me," Lyra said softly. The miners jumped, bowing clumsily when they recognized her glowing markings. "Your Highness," an older woman rasped. She was missing 3 fingers on her left hand. "Tell me the truth," Lyra said, keeping her voice low. "Draxon says production is up because morale is high. Is that true?" The woman looked at Kale, then back at Lyra. "Morale is high because the whipping stopped for your visit, Highness. Last week, 12 men went into the lower shafts to fix a ventilation fan. The gas scrubbers failed. Draxon didn't send a rescue team. He said the equipment was worth more than the labor." Lyra felt sick. "He left them?" "He sealed the tunnel," the woman said, her eyes dead. "To save the fan." Lyra stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. She had worn jewelry made from these stones. She had danced in halls built from the profits of this misery. Kyle stepped in, gently guiding her away as Draxon's security detail rounded the corner. "We need to go," Kale murmured, back in the safety of the turbolift. Lyra leaned against the wall, trembling with rage. "I will have him executed," she hissed. "I will tell my father, and we will send the fleet." "Your father knows," Kale said quietly. Lyra whipped her head around. "What?" "The production quotas for Vexarian are set by the High Council. Lyra, Draxon meets them. That is all the Emperor asks. Do you think the marble in your palace polishes itself?" "My father is a good man," Lyra shouted, her voice echoing in the small metal box. "He would never condone this." "He condones it by not looking," Kale said. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the floor numbers count up. "It is how the Empire works. You live in a bubble. Princess, a beautiful iridescent bubble, but the walls are made of blood." "Stop it!" Lyra shoved him. It was a weak, emotional shove, but he let himself be moved a step. "You are supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side," Kyle said, turning to face her. His gray eyes were fierce. "That is why I am telling you the truth. If you push Draxon too hard without backup, you won't leave this planet. People like me died in the mud so you could stay in that bubble. Don't pop it unless you're ready to breathe the toxic air." The doors opened. They were on the penthouse level. Lyra stared at him, the raw honesty of his words cutting deeper than Draxon's mockery ever could. She realized with a terrifying clarity that he was right. She wasn't the hero of this story. She was the beneficiary of the villainy. She walked out of the lift without a word, her heart heavy with a new, terrible weight. The guest suite was an insult of opulence. It was decorated in gold and velvet, perched on the highest spire of the palace with a panoramic view of the smog-choked sunset. For security. Draxon had given them adjoining rooms connected by a single, thin door. Lyra paced her room, unable to settle. She felt dirty, even after a sonic shower. She kept seeing the missing fingers of the miner woman. She walked to the connecting door. She could hear Kyle moving on the other side, the heavy clank of his armor being unlatched, the soft hiss of his undersuit. "Kale," she called out, "I am here." His voice came through the wall, muffled but close. "This suite is ridiculous," she said, leaning her forehead against the cool metal of the door. "There are rose petals on the bed, in a mining colony." "Draxon is trying to impress you," Kyle replied. "Or seduce you. I haven't decided which is more nauseating." Lyra laughed, a short, dry sound. "I think I prefer the insults. At least they were honest." There was a silence. She could hear the rhythm of his breathing. It was steady, slow. "The walls are very thin, Kyle," she teased softly, needing to break the tension, needing to feel a connection to the only person on this planet who wasn't trying to use her. "I can hear you thinking." "I am not thinking, Princess. I am cleaning my rifle." "Liar. You are thinking about me. I am paid to think about you. It is in the job description." "I mean, you are thinking about the lift, about what you said." "I said what I meant. I know." Lyra traced the pattern on the door with her finger. "I can hear you breathing. You know. It is distracting." On the other side of the wall, Kyle froze. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, stripped down to his black undersuit, the neural interface ports on his spine glowing faintly. He looked at the door. He could picture her standing there. He felt the heat rise in his neck. He wasn't used to this. The banter that felt like combat, the teasing that felt like an invitation. "Go to sleep, Lyra," he said, his voice straining to remain professional. "Make me," she whispered. Kyle closed his eyes. He should report her for harassment. He should request a transfer. He should do anything but sit here and wish the door wasn't locked. "Good night, Princess," he said firmly. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his pulse hammering a traitorous rhythm against his ribs. The attack came at 3 in the morning. It didn't come with an explosion or a shout. It came with a hiss. Kyle woke instantly. His interface, even in sleep mode, monitored the local electromagnetic spectrum. He picked up a variance, a localized jamming signal centered on the next room, Lyra's room. He didn't think. He didn't reach for the door handle. The door was a choke point. If there were intruders, they would be watching it. He rolled off the bed, grabbing his plasma pistol, and sprinted toward the wall. In the next room, Lyra woke to a strange clicking sound. She sat up, the silk sheets sliding down her bare shoulders. Floating in the center of the room were 5 silver discs. They looked like the standard cleaning drones that hovered in the hallways. But they had rearranged themselves into a firing circle around her bed. Panels slid open on the drones, revealing needle-thin barrels glowing with violet energy. Lyra opened her mouth to scream, but the air caught in her throat. The wall to her right exploded. It wasn't a door opening. It was the entire section of plaster and lath disintegrating as Kale smashed through it shoulder first. He was a blur of motion, wrapped in a shimmering kinetic field that sent drywall and dust blasting across the room like shrapnel. "Down!" he roared. He launched himself across the gap, tackling Lyra just as the drones opened fire. He hit her hard, his momentum carrying them both off the high mattress. They slammed onto the floor on the far side of the bed, a tangle of limbs and silk. Above them, silent energy needles shredded the pillows where Lyra's head had been a second ago. Feathers exploded into the air, drifting down like snow. Kale was on top of her, shielding her body with his own. He was heavy, solid, a wall of muscle and armor plating. Lyra gasped. The wind knocked out of her. "Stay down," he hissed. He rolled off her, coming up into a crouch. He raised his pistol and fired. Thwip crack! The first drone exploded in a shower of sparks. The others spun, their sensors locking onto the new threat. Cale moved with a speed that wasn't human. He didn't just dodge, he anticipated. His eyes were glowing with that terrifying blue light again. He slid across the polished floor, firing under the bed frame. Crack, crack. 2 more drones fell, clattering to the floor. The last 2 adjusted their elevation, their barrels glowing brighter. They were charging a wide dispersal burst. Cale dropped his gun. It was empty. He threw his hand out. The air in the room warped. A wave of telekinetic force slammed into the drones, smashing them violently against the stone fireplace. They crumpled into scrap metal, sparking and dying. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the hiss of a severed coolant line in the wall. Cale remained in a crouch for 3 seconds, scanning the room, his chest heaving. When he was sure nothing else was moving, he turned to Lyra. "Are you hit?" he demanded. Lyra was sitting up against the overturned bedside table. She was shaking. The strap of her silk nightgown had torn in the fall, slipping down her arm to expose the luminous markings on her shoulder and the swell of her breast. She wasn't looking at the destroyed drones. She was looking at him. Cale looked at her. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, making his senses hyper-acute. He could smell the ozone from the blasters. He could smell the dust from the wall. And he could smell her, the scent of jasmine and terror and warm skin. He realized where his eyes were lingering. He jerked his gaze away, staring fiercely at the far wall. "Cover yourself," he said, his voice rough. Lyra pulled the torn silk up, clutching it to her chest. She tried to stand, but her legs were water. They were the cleaning drones," she stammered. "How did they?" Cale moved to her. He didn't touch her, but he hovered close, his body radiating heat. They were modified, assassination protocols, silent, efficient. He reached out a hand to help her up, then hesitated. Lyra grabbed his hand. She pulled herself up, but she didn't let go. She stepped into him, needing the solidity of him. Her bare feet were on the cold stone, but he was warm. "You came through the wall," she whispered, looking at the jagged hole between their rooms. "The door was too slow," Cale muttered. He looked down at her. They were inches apart. The dust from the explosion coated his hair and shoulders. He looked wild, dangerous, and utterly unlike the polite guard she had mocked in the throne room. The air between them crackled. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a raw, magnetic pull. She felt the urge to press herself against him, to trace the glowing veins on his neck, to find out if the fire inside him burned as hot as it looked. Cale's eyes dropped to her lips. His breathing hitched. Then he stepped back, breaking the connection. "I need to check the drone cores," he said, turning away abruptly. "We need to know who sent them." Cale jacked his interface directly into the charred remains of the lead drone. He sat on the floor, his eyes glazed over as he sifted through the data streams in his head. Lyra sat on the edge of the ruined bed, wearing one of Cale's spare tunics over her torn gown. It was too big for her, hanging to her knees, but it smelled like him. "Got it," Cale said, his voice flat. "Draxon?" Lyra asked. "No, Draxon is a thug. These encryptions are sophisticated." Cale blinked, the blue light fading from his eyes. He looked pale, sicker than he had after the crash. "What is it?" Lyra asked, moving to kneel beside him. "The drones were activated by a remote signal," Cale said slowly. "I traced the source code. It matches a file in the restricted Imperial archives." "My father again?" Deeper. Kale swiped his hand, projecting a hologram from his wrist console. It was a dense schematic of a biological weapon, a human soldier fused with alien technology. The header read, Project Aegis, Subject 734. Designation, Kale. Lyra stared at the hologram. She saw diagrams of Kale's nervous system, the way the nanotech had been woven into his spine, his brainstem. This is your file, she said. Keep reading, Kale said. He sounded hollow. Lyra scrolled down. Her breath caught. Primary objective, protection of Valerius bloodline. Secondary objective, compliance enforcement, bonding parameters. Subject is genetically tuned to respond to pheromonal and biometric signatures of Princess Lyriel. Activation only possible in proximity to target. Lyra read it again. The words blurred. Genetically tuned, she whispered. To me. She looked at Kale. He wasn't looking at the hologram. He was looking at his hands. I wasn't assigned to you, Lyra, he said, his voice barely audible. I was made for you. They took an orphan from the rim, cut him open, and filled him with tech that responds to your heartbeat. My powers. They don't fully work unless I am near you. I am a battery. You are the switch. Lyra scrambled back, horror flooding her chest. She felt violated, and she felt a crushing, overwhelming guilt. You are property, she said. The word tasted like ash. My property. Yes. Does my father know? He signed the order. Lyra stood up, knocking the hologram projector over. It is monstrous. You are a person, not a toaster, not a guard dog. Tell that to the interface, Kale snapped, standing up. Tell that to the code in my head that screams every time you are in danger. Do you know what it feels like? To have your free will overridden by someone else's pulse? I didn't know, Lyra shouted, tears streaming down her face. I mocked you, I called you small, I treated you like furniture. I know, Kyle shouted back, and I had to stand there and take it because my body wouldn't let me leave. I am sorry, Lyra screamed. I am so sorry. I don't want your pity. Kyle advanced on her. I want my head back. I want to know if I am saving you because I want to, or because I have to. They were standing chest to chest now, the argument burning up the air between them. The anger was a physical thing, hot and desperate. Lyra looked up at him. She saw the torture in his eyes. She saw the man beneath the programming, fighting to breathe. You are not a weapon, she said fiercely, grabbing the lapels of his armor. I release you, do you hear me? I command you to be free. It doesn't work like that, Kyle rasped. You can't command gravity. Then I will break it, she vowed. I will burn the whole empire down if I have to. But I will break it. She looked at his lips. The desire that had been simmering all night, fueled by adrenaline and terror, suddenly boiled over. It was a need to prove he was real, to bridge the gap between princess and weapon, to apologize with something stronger than words. She reached up, her hand cupping his jaw, her thumb brushing the scar on his cheek. Kale, she breathed. He caught her wrist. His grip was hard, trembling. He looked at her with a mix of hunger and despair. This is against protocol, he whispered. This is treason. I am the princess, Lyra said. I am the protocol. She pulled him down. Or maybe he pulled her up. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It was desperate and angry and tasted of salt and ozone. Kale groaned low in his throat, his resistance shattering. His arms went around her, crushing her against him, lifting her slightly off the floor. Lyra buried her hands in his hair, pulling him closer, trying to merge with him. The kiss was a reclamation. It was a defiance of the code that said he was a thing and she was a master. In this moment, they were just two terrified people clinging to each other in the dark. Cale's mouth was hot, demanding. He kissed her like a man starving. Lyra felt the nanotech in his blood humming against her, but this time it didn't feel like a machine. It felt like a heartbeat. She felt his hands slide down her back, pressing her hips against his. The barrier of rank, of species, of duty, it all dissolved. For a long, suspended moment, there was nothing in the universe but the heat of his skin and the desperate pressure of his mouth on hers. Then, a siren wailed. It was a harsh, mechanical shriek that cut through the room. Cale tore himself away, gasping for air. He looked at Lyra, his eyes wide, his lips swollen. He looked terrified of what he had just done. "The alarm," he said, his voice shaking. Lyra reached for him, but he stepped back, his training slamming back into place. "That is the city-wide alert," Kyle said, moving to the window. He looked out. The mining towers were flashing red. Blast doors were slamming shut across the valley. "Draxon," Kyle said grimly. "He has locked down the city." He turned back to Lyra. The intimacy of the moment was shattered, replaced by the cold reality of survival. But the look in his eyes had changed. It wasn't just duty anymore. "They are coming for us," Kyle said. He grabbed his empty pistol and slammed a fresh power pack into the receiver. "Get your boots, princess. The diplomatic portion of this trip is over." Lyra touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his mouth. She looked at the man who had been built to serve her, and realized she would die before she let anyone own him again. "I am ready," she said. The sirens were not a warning, they were a death knell. Vexarian's capital, usually a hive of neon and noise, had turned into a hunting ground. Draxon's private security forces, armored shock troops in black and gold, flooded the lower levels. They kicked in doors, dragged miners from their hab blocks, and branded anyone who resisted as a terrorist. But Lyriel knew the truth. They weren't hunting terrorists. They were hunting witnesses. "Move!" Cale hissed, pulling her into the shadows of a ventilation duct. They were 3 levels down in the Undercity, a maze of rusted pipes and dripping condensation. Above them, the heavy thud of jackboots echoed on the grate. "They are purging the sectors," Lyra whispered, wiping grime from her face. "Anyone who knows about Project Aegis, anyone who spoke to us. Standard containment protocol," Cale said grimly. He checked the corner, his pistol drawn. "Leave no loose ends, especially not royal ones." They were not alone. A hand reached out from the darkness, grabbing Cale's shoulder. Cale spun, jamming the barrel of his weapon under the stranger's chin. "Easy, soldier," a rough voice said. A woman stepped into the dim light. She was a Zalari, but she wore miner's coveralls and had a cybernetic eye that glowed a menacing red. "We are not the ones trying to kill you yet." "Who are you?" Lyra demanded, stepping up beside Cale. "I am Jax," the woman said. "Resistance. We heard the broadcast about the rogue princess. Figured if Draxon wants you dead this badly, you might be worth saving." Jax led them deeper, through a labyrinth of abandoned service tunnels that smelled of sulfur and old ozone. They emerged into a cavernous space carved directly into a vein of luminous blue ore. It was a makeshift bar, filled with a motley crew of humans, Zalari, and 4-armed Gorians. The air was thick with smoke and suspicion. The music stopped when they walked in. Every eye turned to Lyra. She felt the weight of their stare. It wasn't the adoration of the court. It was a mixture of hatred and hunger. To them, she was the face of the empire that starved them. "So this is the jewel," a miner spat, slamming his drink down. "Doesn't look so shiny down here in the muck. She looks like she breaks easy." Another laughed. Kale stepped forward, his body language shifting instantly to lethal readiness. Back off. No, Lyra said, putting a hand on Kale's arm. Stand down. Lieutenant. She walked into the center of the room. She was dirty. Her borrowed tunic was torn, and she had no crown. But she held her head high. You are right, she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back of the room. I don't shine down here. Up there in the palace, I thought the light came from the crystals. I didn't know it came from your sweat. A silence fell. It wasn't friendly, but it was listening. I have been blind, Lyra continued, turning to face the room. I made jokes about mining quotas while you died in the dark. I laughed about security while you were beaten in the streets. I was ignorant. And ignorance is a luxury I can no longer afford. Pretty words, Jax said, crossing her arms. What good are they? I can't give you your years back, Lyra said. But I can give you the truth. Draxon isn't just a greedy governor. He is part of a coup that threatens the entire empire. If you help me get back to Etheria, I will expose him. I will burn his operation to the ground. And if we don't? The miner asked. Lyra smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that reminded them she was the Emperor's daughter. Then we all die here, and Draxon wins. I don't know about you, but I would rather die fighting than waiting. A low chuckle started in the corner. Then another. She has got teeth, Jax noted, a grudging respect in her voice. All right, Princess, grab a drink. We have work to do. While Lyra navigated the politics of the resistance, Kale found himself cornered near the bar. A human man, older, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, was staring at him. He wore a faded military jacket with the insignia ripped off. I know you, the man said. His voice was shaking. Kale looked at him. Recognition hit like a physical blow. Sergeant Miller, the 4th Battalion? There is no 4th Battalion, Miller said, his eyes wet. Not anymore. Not since the Rim. Kyle felt a cold knot in his stomach. I was told it was an ambush, that I was the only survivor because I was in the medevac. Bullshit. Miller slammed his prosthetic hand on the table. It wasn't an ambush. Kale, it was a field test. They dropped us into that kill zone to see if the interface would trigger, to see if stress would activate the weapon. Kale stepped back, the room spinning. No, that is impossible. We were the kindling kid, Miller whispered. They burned 1,000 men to light the fire inside you. And when you didn't activate, they scrapped the project and buried the bodies. I crawled out from under a pile of my friends. Kyle leaned against the wall, fighting the urge to vomit. The memories he had, the confusion, the guilt of surviving. It was all a lie. He wasn't a lucky soldier. He was a failed experiment that had cost 1,000 lives. Why are you here? Miller asked, looking at Lyra across the room. Why are you guarding one of them? Because she didn't know, Kale said, his voice hollow. And because she is the only one who can stop it. She is the trigger, Kale, Miller warned. Don't you get it? They built you for her. If you stay with her, you finish the job they started. The reprieve didn't last. Jax's comms officer, a twitchy Zalari with nimble fingers, intercepted a burst transmission from the governor's palace. We have a problem, Jax announced, projecting the decrypted text onto the wall. Priority 1, Secure Asset 734. Designation, Living Interface. Authorization, High Counselor Varric. Status of Princess, Expendable. Terminate on sight. Lyra stared at the words. Terminate on sight. Her own government. But her eyes were drawn to the other line. Asset 734. She looked at Kyle. He was standing in the shadows, his face a mask of stone. He wasn't looking at the screen, he was looking at the door, calculating angles of fire. "They are coming," Jack said. "Draxon is moving a heavy mechanized division into the mining sector. He says it is to quell a riot, but he is heading straight for the main lift shaft." "The evacuation route," Lyra realized. "The families are down there." "He is going to bury them," Jack said. "To flush you out." Lyra slammed her hand on the table. "No. We evacuate. Now. Get the civilians to the transport tunnels. We hold the line at the main junction." "We?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "You are royalty. Princess. You don't hold lines. You hide in bunkers." "Not today," Lyra said. She grabbed a pulse rifle from the rack on the wall. It was heavy, awkward in her hands, but she checked the charge with a grim determination. "Today, I am just another target." She looked at Kyle. "Are you with me?" Kyle stepped out of the shadows. He looked at Miller, then at Lyra. He saw the fire in her eyes, not the bioluminescent glow of her species, but the human fire of courage. "Always," Kale said. The battle for the mines was a chaotic, screeching nightmare. The tunnels echoed with the roar of plasma fire and the screams of dying machinery. The resistance fought with desperate ferocity, using mining lasers and improvised explosives to hold back Draxon's elite guard. Lyra was in the thick of it. She wasn't a soldier, but she was brave. She directed the flow of refugees, shouting orders over the din, dragging wounded miners to cover. Her robes were shredded, her face streaked with soot and blue blood from a graze on her cheek. Kyle was her shadow. He moved around her like a living shield, dropping enemies with precise, efficient shots. He didn't use his powers. He was terrified to let go. Terrified that if he opened the door, the monster Miller had described would come out. But the enemy had more than rifles. The ground shook. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump echoed from the main tunnel, getting louder with every second. "Pull back!" Jack screamed over the comms. "They brought a siege breaker." A massive war mech stomped around the corner. It was 20 feet tall, a walking tank of black armor and hydraulic muscle. Its primary cannon glowed with a sickening green light. It leveled the weapon at a group of trapped miners huddled behind a collapsed ore cart. "No!" Lyra screamed. She broke cover, sprinting toward them. "Lyra!" Kale lunged for her, but she was too fast. She skidded to a halt in front of the miners, raising her small rifle against the behemoth. It was a gesture of defiance so futile it was heartbreaking. The mech's pilot laughed, a distorted sound over the speakers. The cannon whined, charging for a shot that would vaporize them all. Kale stopped. He looked at Lyra. He looked at the miners. He looked at the machine that was about to kill the only person who had ever seen him as a man. The fear vanished. It was replaced by a cold, absolute clarity. "Hold the line," the voice in his head said. "No," Kale thought. "Break it." He dropped his weapon. He walked out into the open, stepping in front of Lyra. "Kale, get back!" Lyra shouted, grabbing his belt. "It is too big." Kale didn't answer. He closed his eyes and exhaled. He dropped the restraints. All of them. The sensation was like falling into a star. The interface in his spine surged, no longer a trickle but a flood. The nanotech bloomed. It started at his neck, veins of blinding white light spreading across his skin. It moved down his arms, consuming the black armor, turning it into a fluid, shifting surface of liquid silver. He opened his eyes. They were no longer gray. They were pure, burning white. The mech fired, a beam of concentrated plasma, hot enough to melt a city block, screamed toward them. Kale raised his hand. He didn't deflect it. He caught it. The energy slammed into an invisible barrier 3 feet from his palm. The air warped. The sound was a deafening crack, like the sky splitting open. Kale roared, a sound that wasn't just a voice, it was a harmonic resonance that shook the tunnel walls. He clenched his fist. The plasma beam crumpled, folding in on itself, compressed into a sphere of angry, writhing energy. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it back. The sphere hit the mech's knee joint. The explosion was absolute. The massive machine toppled, crashing into the tunnel wall with the sound of a dying god. But Kale wasn't done. He reached out with both hands. Tendrils of light shot from his fingers, burying themselves in the fallen mech's chassis. He wasn't just pushing it. He was interfacing with it. The mech convulsed. Its system screamed as Kale's will overrode the pilot's controls. "Get out!" Kale's voice echoed, layered and distorted, vibrating in everyone's teeth. He lifted the 20-ton machine into the air. He lifted it with his mind. He tossed it down the tunnel like a discarded toy, smashing it into the advancing column of shock troops. The ceiling groaned, rocks falling like rain. Kyle looked up. The falling boulders stopped in midair. He held the mountain up with a thought. Lyra watched him, her mouth open, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She saw the power flowing off him in waves, distorting the light, bending gravity. He was terrifying. He was a god of war in a human skin. "You are too small to be my guard." The words echoed in her memory, mocking her. He wasn't small. He was infinite. Kyle turned to look at her. For a second, his face was alien, consumed by the light. Then, the glow faltered. He collapsed. The rocks fell, crashing harmlessly around the perimeter he had cleared. The light faded from his skin, leaving him small and broken on the dusty floor. "Kale!" Lyra was there before he hit the ground completely. She slid on her knees, catching his head in her lap. His armor was smoking, his skin was gray, the veins black and bruised. He was shaking violently, his teeth chattering. "Did I?" he gasped, his eyes unfocused. "Did I hurt you?" Lyra looked at the destruction around them. She looked at the miners who were staring at him with holy terror. She brushed the hair back from his forehead, her hands trembling. "No," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You saved us. You saved everyone." She leaned down, pressing her forehead against his, ignoring the heat radiating from him. "You are not small," she sobbed, rocking him gently. "You are not small at all." They carried him to a safe house deep in the abandoned sector. It was a small, cramped storage room, but it had a lock and a medical kit. Lyra dismissed everyone. Jax tried to argue, but one look at the princess's face made the hardened rebel back down. Lyra stripped the armor off him. Her hands, usually so manicured and precise, were stained with grease and his blood. She cleaned the burns on his arms, applying med gel with a tenderness that surprised her. Kale lay on the cot, drifting in and out of consciousness. He flinched when she touched the interface ports on his spine. "It is okay," she murmured. "I am here." By midnight, his fever broke. He opened his eyes. They were gray again, but haunted. "You saw it," he whispered. Lyra sat on the edge of the cot, holding a wet cloth. "I saw you." "You saw the weapon," Kale corrected. He tried to sit up, but groaned and fell back. "That is what I am. Lyra, that is what they put inside me. A monster that eats gravity and spits fire." "Stop it," Lyra said softly. "I could have killed you," he said, staring at the ceiling. When the surge hit, I didn't know where I ended and the destruction began. If I lose control... "You didn't," she said firmly. "You protected the miners. You protected me. The weapon didn't choose that. You did." She took his hand. It was rough, scarred, engulfed by her own slender fingers. "Kyle," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Look at me." He turned his head. "I am terrified," she admitted, "but not of you. I am terrified of a universe that would try to crush something as beautiful as what you did today." Kyle looked at her. He saw the smudge of soot on her cheek, the tear in her tunic. She wasn't a princess looking at a guard. She was a woman looking at a man she respected, a man she wanted. The air in the room changed. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. "Lyra," he breathed. She leaned down. She kissed the scar on his cheek, then the corner of his mouth. "I am not giving you an order," she whispered against his skin. "I am making a request." Kale's hand came up, tangling in her hair. "Request granted." He pulled her down. This time, there was no desperation, no frantic clash of teeth. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was an exploration of the silence after the noise. Lyra straddled him, careful of his injuries. She peeled the tunic off her shoulders, letting it fall. The bioluminescent markings on her skin glowed softly in the dark room, painting them both in blue light. Kale traced the lines of light on her ribs with reverent fingers. "You are shining." "So are you," she said, kissing his neck right over the interface port. They moved together with a clumsy, beautiful grace. There were no ranks here, no protocols, just skin and heat and the desperate need to prove that they were alive. Lyra insisted on guiding him, on setting the pace, not as a command, but as an invitation to equality. She wanted him to feel her weight, to know that she was there with him, not above him. When he entered her, he made a sound that was half prayer, half sob. He held her like she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. And for the first time in his life, Kale didn't feel like a weapon being fired. He felt like a man being held. Afterward, they lay tangled in the thin blanket, the silence of the room heavy and sweet. Lyra traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. "We are going to have to update the royal decree," she murmured sleepily. Section 4, paragraph 2. Fraternization with security personnel. Kale laughed, a low rumble in his chest. "I think the punishment for that is exile to a mining colony." "We are already here," Lyra smiled. "Joke is on them." Kyle tightened his arm around her. The humor faded, replaced by the cold reality waiting outside the door. "Lyra," he said quietly, "I am afraid." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "Of Draxon?" "No," Kale said. "Of the interface. When I let go today, I liked it. The power. It felt like being a god. And then I looked at you, and I was terrified I would break you just by standing there." He looked away, shame coloring his voice. "I don't know if I can control it next time." Lyra took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were fierce. "You are not a god, Kale. You are a man who happens to be very loud sometimes." She kissed his forehead. "And I promise you this," she vowed. "I will never let anyone use that power again, not the council, not my father, and not even me. Unless you say yes, unless you choose it, you belong to yourself." Kyle closed his eyes, letting the promise wash over him. It was a dangerous promise to make, but he believed her. A sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. "Princess!" Jax's voice came through, urgent. "We have incoming intel. You need to see this." Lyra sighed, pressing her forehead against Kale's for one last second. "Duty calls." "I hate duty," Kale muttered, but he was already sitting up, reaching for his pants. They dressed quickly, the intimacy of the last hour folding into a quiet, unbreakable partnership. When they opened the door, Jax was holding a data pad. "We intercepted an encrypted feed from the Capitol," Jax said. "It is breaking news." She handed the pad to Lyra. On the screen, High Counselor Varric stood at a podium in the Imperial Senate. He looked grave. "Citizens of the Empire," Varric intoned. "It is with heavy hearts that we announce the tragic disappearance of Princess Lyriel. Her ship was lost with all hands in the Vexarian sector. We presume dead." Lyra went cold. "Furthermore," Varric continued, "due to the Emperor's failing health and this devastating loss, the Council has voted to institute emergency measures. A summit of succession will be held in 3 days on the orbital station Zenith. A new heir will be chosen to ensure stability." "They are doing it," Kale said, standing behind Lyra. "They are erasing you." "They are installing a puppet," Lyra said, her voice hard. "Syrexa, or Varric himself." Jax looked at them. "You are dead, Princess. Officially." Lyra handed the pad back. She looked at Kale. She saw the soldier, the lover, the partner. "Dead people have one advantage, Jax," Lyra said, a cold smile touching her lips. "No one looks for them coming through the front door." "We have to get to that summit," Kyle said. "We have to show them the ghost." "We have one chance," Lyra said. "To expose the lie, to show them Project Aegis, to show them you—" She took Kale's hand. "Ready to crash a party, Lieutenant?" Kale squeezed her hand back. "Only if I get to lead." "Deal," she said. The freighter was named the Broken Wing, a heavy hauler disguised as a garbage scow that smelled of burnt grease and rotting hydroponics. It was hideous, slow, and the most beautiful thing Lyriel had ever seen because it was taking them home to finish the fight. They were 3 days out from the capital, running silent on the smuggling lanes. The quarters were cramped, a single bunk in a maintenance closet that hummed with the vibration of the sublight engines. Lyra sat on the edge of the narrow mattress, staring at a ration pack that looked like gray paste. "It tastes better if you close your eyes," Kale said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, cleaning his stolen plasma pistol with a rag. "It tastes like despair," Lyra countered, tossing the packet onto the metal floor. "Is this what my people eat, Kale? Is this what we feed the miners?" "On a good day," Kale said. He holstered the weapon and stepped into the room, the space instantly shrinking with his presence. "On a bad day, they eat algae soup." Lyra pulled her knees to her chest. The anger that had fueled her on Vexarian was cooling into a heavy, suffocating guilt. She looked at her hands, the bioluminescent markings on her wrists dim and flickering. "I did not know," she whispered. "I bought dresses that cost more than this ship. I complained about the temperature of my wine while people were eating paste in the dark. How do I lead them, Kale? How do I look them in the eye and ask for their trust when I have been part of the boot on their neck?" Kale sat down beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. He didn't touch her immediately, he just let his presence settle around her, a solid anchor in the gravityless drift of her conscience. "You were blind, Lyra," Kyle said softly. "But you woke up. Most royals spend their whole lives with their eyes shut tight." "That is not enough," she said, her voice cracking. "I feel sick with it. I feel like I should spend the next 50 years on my knees begging for forgiveness." Kyle laughed, a low, dry sound. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, turning her face toward him. His gray eyes were serious, stripped of their usual mockery. "If you spend the rest of your life apologizing, when will you have time to fix anything?" he asked. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Lyra blinked. Guilt is useless, princess, Kale said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. It is just vanity in a different dress. It makes you the center of the tragedy. You want to help? Stop crying about what you ate yesterday and start cooking something better for tomorrow. Lyra stared at him. It was harsh advice, but it was exactly what she needed. It cut through the self-pity like a laser. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A smile, small and genuine, tugged at her lips. You are very wise for someone who fits in a storage locker, she teased. I have had a lot of time to think in small spaces. Kale murmured. The humor broke the tension. Lyra leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He smelled of gun oil and the cheap soap from the sonic shower. But to her, it was the scent of safety. When we win, Lyra whispered, I am going to change it. All of it. No more quotas, no more shadow guilds. I want an empire where a guard can look a princess in the eye without fear. That sounds dangerous, Kale said, his arm sliding around her waist to pull her closer. Chaos. Anarchy. Equality, she corrected. She tilted her head back, looking at his mouth. The playful mood shifted, thickening into the heavy magnetic heat that had followed them since the safe house. Shut up and kiss me, Lieutenant, she commanded softly. As you wish, Your Highness, he replied, and then he did. They spent the rest of the journey in a blur of planning and stolen moments, sleeping tangled together on the narrow bunk, Lyra's glowing skin illuminating the dark, Kale's steady heartbeat counting down the seconds until they returned to the lion's den. Etheria looked different from the bottom. They infiltrated the capital through the waste reclamation sectors, a labyrinth of rusted maintenance decks and forgotten shrines that hung like barnacles beneath the glistening crystal spires. Here, the air was thick and humid, smelling of ozone and frying street food. There were no auroras, only the flickering neon of repair shops and the dull roar of the ventilation fans that kept the upper city pristine. Lyra walked with her hood up, her face smeared with grease, disguised as a tech runner. Kale walked point, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning every shadow. They passed a group of dock workers playing dice on a crate. Did you hear? One of them laughed, spitting on the deck. The princess is dead. Engine failure, they say. Good riddance, another grunted. One less leech to feed. Maybe the new one will have the decency to lower the water tax. Doubt it, the first man said. They are all the same. Shiny on the outside, rotten on the inside. I heard this one spent 1 million credits on a birthday party while the outer rim starved. Hope she burned all the way down. Lyra stiffened. The words felt like physical blows. She wanted to stop, to scream that she was trying, that she was here. Kale's hand found the small of her back, applying a gentle, steady pressure. Keep moving, the touch said. Listen. They moved past the workers into the shadows of a service tunnel. They hate me, Lyra whispered. They don't know you. Kale said, they hate the symbol. You have to show them the person. I don't know if the person is worth saving, she admitted. I do, Kale said simply. They reached the rendezvous point, an ancient, decommissioned water purification temple hidden deep in the infrastructure. The walls were damp stone, covered in moss, a stark contrast to the white marble above. 3 figures were waiting in the gloom. Master Toller, Lyra's old history tutor, a man with ink-stained fingers and a perpetually worried expression. Counselor Jarek, a young idealist who had been pushed to the fringes of the court, and High Priestess Iora, a woman draped in silver robes, her eyes blind and white, seeing things only through the force of the void. Child, Toller gasped, rushing forward to embrace Lyra. We thought, the reports, I am hard to kill, Toller, Lyra said, hugging him back. But we do not have much time. The summit is in 6 hours, Counselor Jarek said, his voice grim. Sorexa has moved the timeline up. She is going to declare herself regent. She has the council terrified. Varric is backing her. Sorexa, Lyra spat the name. My own aunt, I should have known. She always told me I was too soft for the throne. She does not think you are soft. Priestess Iora spoke. Her voice was like wind chimes in a storm. She stepped forward, her blind eyes locking onto Kale. She thinks you are dangerous because of him. Kale stiffened. Me? You are the living interface, Iora said, walking toward him. She raised a hand, hovering it over his chest. Project Aegis was not just science. Lieutenant, it was alchemy. We blessed the nanites. We sang the binding songs. She turned her head to Lyra. Do you know why he survived the procedure when 1,000 others died? Princess? Do you know why his power only unlocks when you are in danger? The files said he was genetically tuned, Lyra said, feeling a cold dread creep up her spine. It is deeper than genetics, Iora said. It is a bloodbind. We took a sample of your blood when you were a child. We wove it into his core. He is not just loyal to you. Lyriel, he is biologically compelled to be your shadow. His nervous system is keyed to your pheromones. He cannot leave you any more than a moon can leave its planet. Lyra recoiled as if she had been slapped. She looked at Kale. Is this true? She demanded. Kale looked at the floor, his jaw tight. I feel it, the pull. Since the moment I walked into the throne room, it hurts to be away from you. Physically hurts. This is slavery, Lyra shouted, her voice echoing in the stone chamber. She looked at the priestess with horror. You bound a human soul to me like a familiar? Without his consent, without mine? It was necessary for the stability of the throne, Iora said calmly. The weapon needed a safety switch. You are the switch. I am not a switch, Lyra raged. She turned to Kale. And you, everything between us, the trust, the other night. Was that you? Or was that the bloodbind? Was that just programming? The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Kyle looked up. His eyes were clear, burning with a quiet intensity. The programming tells me to catch a bullet for you, Kale said. It tells me to stand between you and the fire. But it does not tell me to laugh at your terrible jokes. It does not tell me to challenge you when you are being a brat. And it certainly didn't tell me to fall in love with you. Lyra's breath caught. I felt the pull, Kyle admitted, stepping closer. It was terrifying, like gravity. But gravity just tells you which way is down. It doesn't tell you to jump. I chose to jump, Lyra. I chose you, not the princess. You. Lyra looked at him, searching his face for any sign of the machine. She found only the man. Destiny is a script, Lyra whispered, repeating a lesson Toller had taught her years ago. But actors can change the lines. Then let's rewrite the ending, Kale said. Sorexa knows about the bond. Counselor Jarek interrupted, checking his chrono. That is why she wants Kale. If she captures him, she can reverse the frequency. She can use him to target you. Or she can dissect him to build more. She won't get the chance, Lyra said, wiping the grease from her face. She looked at her small team. We are not going to hide. We are going to the summit, and we are going to walk in through the front door. The plan was madness. It relied on surprise, on the chaos of the moment, and on Kale. They used the maintenance lifts to ascend into the royal spire. The higher they went, the cleaner the air became, until they were back in the world of light and crystal. The summit was being held in the Grand Rotunda. The massive doors were sealed, guarded by Syrexa's elite shock troops. "We need a distraction," Jarek whispered. "I am the distraction," Kale said. He stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't wearing his armor. He was wearing the torn, dirty flight suit from Vexarian, his hands raised. "Hold fire," a guard shouted. "It is the fugitive." Before they could shoot, Kale dropped to his knees. "I surrender. I have information on the princess." The guards swarmed him. They roughed him up, securing his hands with magnetic cuffs. "Take him to the Chancellor," the captain ordered. "She will want to see this prize herself." As they dragged Kale inside, Lyra watched from the ventilation grate above, her heart hammering. It was the only way to get him close enough. Inside the rotunda, the scene was set for a coronation. Syrexa stood at the podium, a tall, imposing woman with sharp features and cold reptilian eyes. The entire High Council was seated before her, and the holographic cameras were broadcasting live to 300 systems. "The Emperor is unfit," Syrexa was saying, her voice smooth and persuasive. "Grief has broken his mind, broken his. And with Lyriel dead, we have no choice but to ensure security. I accept the burden of regency." The doors hissed open. The guards dragged Kale down the center aisle. "Chancellor!" the captain shouted. "We found him! The traitor!" Syrexa paused. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Ah, the broken toy. Bring him here." They threw Kyle at the foot of the podium. He groaned, spitting blood on the polished white floor. "So," Syrexa purred, stepping down to loom over him. "The little guard survives. But where is your mistress?" "She is gone," Kyle rasped, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "You won." "I always win," Syrexa said. She looked at the cameras. "Behold, citizens. This is the result of the Emperor's weakness. A human mongrel, given power he could not control, who failed to save the heir." She leaned down, whispering so only Kale could hear. "I am going to peel you apart, layer by layer. I am going to find that interface and put it in a dog. It will be a better guardian than you. Get away from him." The voice rang out from the gallery above. Lyra kicked out the ventilation grate. She dropped 20 feet, her landing clumsy but fierce. She stood up, dusty, bruised, and wearing the clothes of a tech runner. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The cameras swiveled. "Lyriel?" Varric stood up, his face pale. You are alive?" "I am alive," Lyra declared, walking down the aisle. Her voice didn't tremble. She projected it with the force of a queen. "And I am done hiding." Syrexa recovered quickly. "Seize her! She is delusional, clearly suffering from trauma." "Do not touch me!" Lyra pointed a finger at the guards. Her eyes blazed with such authority that the soldiers hesitated. She walked straight to Kyle. She didn't look at Syrexa. She knelt beside him, checking his cuffs. "You look terrible," she whispered. "Part of the plan." He grinned through a split lip. Lyra stood up and faced the council. She faced the cameras. She faced the Empire. "My aunt tells you I am dead," Lyra said. "She tells you the Emperor is weak. She tells you we need fear to keep order." She gestured to the screen behind her, where Jarek, back in the control room, patched in the feed from Vexarian. Images of the starving miners, the massacre, the drone logs, and the Project Aegis files flashed across the massive hologram. "This is the order she brings," Lyra shouted. "Slavery, murder, a weapon made of a human soul." Syrexa's face twisted in fury. "Cut the feed! Kill them!" The guards raised their rifles. "Wait!" Lyra stepped in front of Kale. She looked directly into the camera lens. For years. I let you believe I was just a pretty face, Lyra said. I let you believe that power comes from bloodlines and crystals. I was wrong. She reached down and pulled Cale to his feet. He stood beside her, swaying slightly, shorter than her, dirty and bound, but his head was high. They told me he was too small to be my guard, Lyra said, her voice softening, filled with an emotion that transcended politics. They told me he was a tool, property. She took his cuffed hands in hers. I stand before you to tell you the truth. Cale is not my property. He is my partner. The room exploded with shock. Nobles gasped. Syrexa looked like she had swallowed a lemon. He is the man I choose, Lyra continued, her voice rising over the noise. Not because of a treaty, not because of a biological program, but because he has more honor in his smallest finger than this entire council has in its vaults. He is my equal, and if you want to kill him, you have to kill me first. It was a declaration of war against tradition, a princess claiming a human, a royal claiming a servant. It was scandalous, it was impossible, and it was working. The guards lowered their weapons, confused. The citizens watching on the feeds were seeing something they had never seen before. A royal who looked human, who bled, and who loved. Syrexa saw her coup crumbling. Her eyes went black with rage. If you love him so much, Syrexa shrieked, pulling a concealed energy dagger from her sleeve. Then die with him, she lunged. Cale! Lyra screamed. Cale didn't need the warning. He felt the shift in the air. He felt Lyra's fear, and it unlocked the gate. But this time, he didn't just let it flood. He remembered the priestess's words. You are the actor. Change the lines. He focused. He didn't want to destroy the room. He wanted to stop the threat. Override Alpha 9, he thought, triggering the backdoor code Ayora had given him. The magnetic cuffs shattered, exploding into dust. Kyle's hands snapped up. The world went still. He didn't unleash a storm. He unleashed a silence. Syrexa froze in midair, her dagger an inch from Lyra's throat. She was caught in a stasis field of absolute precision. Her face was contorted in a scream that wouldn't come. Cale turned his hand. The rifles of the 50 guards surrounding them suddenly became heavy, pulling down with 10 tons of gravity. They were yanked from the soldiers' hands and pinned to the floor. Kyle's eyes were glowing, but it was a soft, steady blue, controlled, beautiful. No, Kyle whispered. He flicked his finger. Syrexa was thrown backward, sliding across the polished floor until she hit the base of the Emperor's empty throne. The dagger clattered uselessly away. Cale stepped forward, shielding Lyra, but he didn't attack. He held the room. He was a conductor, and the gravity of the chamber was his orchestra. I am not a weapon, Cale's voice echoed, amplified by the interface. And she is not a target. He looked at the counselors, who were cowering in their seats. The coup is over, Cale stated. Syrexa struggled to sit up, her hair wild. Kill him! He is a monster. But no one moved. The guards looked at their pinned weapons, then at the man who could have crushed their skulls but chose to disarm them instead. Varric was the first to move. He looked at the holographic evidence still playing on the screen. He looked at the princess standing tall in her rags. He looked at the tide turning. Arrest her, Varric said, pointing a shaking finger at Syrexa. 2 of the Imperial guards hesitated, then turned and marched toward the Chancellor. Lyra let out a breath and slumped against Cale. He caught her, his arm going around her waist. The blue light in his eyes faded, returning to the warm gray she loved. Show off, she whispered into his chest. I learned from the best, Kyle murmured, kissing the top of her head. The chamber erupted into chaos, shouting, orders, the rush of media drones. But in the center of the storm, the princess and the guard stood together, an island of calm in a universe that had just changed forever. Syrexa was dragged away, screaming curses about bloodlines and purity. Lyra watched her go, feeling not triumph, but relief. She looked up at Kale. "You didn't break anything," she noted, looking at the pristine walls. "I broke the rules," Kale smiled tiredly. "I think that counts." Lyra laughed, and for the first time in months the sound was light, free of fear. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers in front of the entire galaxy. "Let's go see my father," she said. "I think we have a lot to talk about." The revolution did not end with a bang, but with a collective shuddering exhale. For 3 days, the capital of Etheria hung in a state of suspended animation. The riots that Syrexa had engineered turned into celebrations. But they were anxious celebrations, the kind where people danced in the streets while keeping one eye on the sky, waiting for the orbital bombardment that never came. The High Council was in disarray, half of them under house arrest, the other half frantically drafting apologies and pledges of loyalty to the princess who had risen from the dead. Lyriel stood on the terrace of the temporary command center, watching the smoke drift up from the lower levels. It wasn't the smoke of destruction, but of bonfires. The people were burning effigies of the old guard. She felt exhausted, her bones ached, and the bioluminescent markings on her skin were dim, pulsing with a slow, tired rhythm. She wore a simple gray tunic, having discarded the rags of her exile but refusing to put on the silks of her station. Kale stood beside her. He was always beside her. He leaned against the stone railing, his arms crossed, watching the horizon. He looked different. The tension that had defined his posture since the day they met, the coiled spring of a man waiting for a blow, was gone. In its place was a quiet, weary stillness. "They are calling for blood," Kyle said softly. "The broadcasts from Vexarian. People want heads on spikes." "They want justice," Lyra corrected, though she knew the line between the two was razor thin. "If we give them vengeance, we just spin the wheel again. I have to break the wheel." "That is a heavy lift," Kyle noted. "Even for a Zalari." Lyra looked at him. "I am not lifting it alone." He met her gaze, the bond between them, the strange mix of chemical programming and raw, forged affection, hummed in the air. "No, you are not." The Emperor's private sanctuary was a room of white silence. Valerius sat in a hover chair by the window, a blanket draped over his withered legs. He looked smaller than Lyra remembered. The towering figure of her childhood had shrunk into a frightened old man. When Lyra entered, he didn't look up. He was staring at a holographic locket floating in his palm, an image of Lyra's mother. "I thought I was saving you," Valerius whispered. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Lyra walked to the window. She didn't kneel. She stood tall, her shadow falling over him. "By turning me into a figurehead?" Lyra asked. "By binding a human soul to my blood without asking either of us?" Valerius closed his hand, extinguishing the hologram. "The Empire is a beast. Lyriel, it eats the weak. I wanted to give you armor. Project Aegis. It was not meant to be a curse. It was meant to be the ultimate shield. A guardian who could not fail, who could not leave, who would love you by the laws of physics. It was slavery." "Father," Lyra said. Her voice was not angry, just terribly sad. "You took a life and turned it into a utility, and you made me the jailer." "I was afraid," Valerius confessed, tears leaking from his milky eyes. "Syrexa, the council, they were circling. I knew I was dying. I needed to know you were safe. I was never safe, Lyra said. I was just ignorant. Safety built on the suffering of others is just a delayed sentence. She knelt then, bringing her face level with his. I am not going to execute Serexa, Lyra said. And I am not going to execute you. Valerius looked at her, hope and shame warring in his face. You should. It is the way. It was the way, Lyra said firmly. It is not my way. I am dissolving the absolute monarchy. We are forming a co-regency. The planetary assemblies will have a vote. Real power. And you are going to abdicate. Valerius slumped, the fight leaving him. To you? To the future, Lyra said. I will serve as the transitional head of state, but I will answer to the law, not make it. She reached into her tunic and pulled out a data slate. But first, she said, sliding the slate onto his lap, you have one last decree to sign. Valerius looked at the document. It was short, legal, absolute. Subject, Asset 734. Designation, Kyle. Status, emancipated. All proprietary claims to biological interface and neural coding are hereby nullified. The subject is recognized as a free citizen of the Etherian Alliance. Valerius looked at Lyra. He picked up the stylus. His hand shook, but he signed. He is a good man, Valerius whispered. Better than we deserved. Yes, Lyra said, taking the slate back. He is. The royal gardens were situated on the highest platform of the spire, a sanctuary of floating islands and waterfalls that cascaded into the clouds. It was night, and the auroras were painting the sky in ribbons of green and violet. Kale was sitting on a stone bench, watching the water fall into the abyss. He wore a fresh uniform, stripped of insignia. He looked clean, rested, and utterly lost. Lyra approached him silently. The grass was soft under her boots. It is done, she said. Kyle stood up. He looked at the data slate in her hand. My father signed it, Lyra said, holding it out. You are free, Kale. The code is still in your head. We cannot remove the nanotech without killing you, but the law is broken. You belong to no one, not the state, not the army. She paused, her throat tight. Not me. Kyle took the slate. He stared at the signature. He traced the imperial seal with his thumb. For 20 years, he had been a serial number. Now, he was a name. He didn't smile. He looked up at the stars, his expression unreadable. Free, he murmured. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. You can go, Lyra said. She had rehearsed this speech a dozen times, but it hurt to say it. You can take a ship, go to the rim, find a quiet planet where no one knows who you are. No wars, no politics, just peace. Kyle looked at her. He saw the shimmering light of her eyes, the set of her jaw that tried to be brave but betrayed her fear. Is that what you want? Kyle asked. For me to leave? I want you to be happy, Lyra said, her voice trembling. I want you to have the choice I never gave you. Kyle set the slate down on the bench. He stepped closer to her. The proximity alarms in his head, the old programming hummed, but he ignored them. He focused on the beat of his own heart. I don't know who I am without orders, Kyle admitted quietly. I wake up reaching for a rifle. I scan rooms for threats before I see the faces. I am broken. Lyra. We are all broken, Lyra whispered. That is how the light gets in. If I leave, Kyle said, taking another step, closing the distance until he was looking up into her face. I will just be a soldier without a war. I will be drifting. He reached out, his hand hesitating before touching her waist. It was a question. Lyra nodded, a barely perceptible movement. He rested his hand on her hip. The heat of her skin seeped through the fabric. "My freedom means I get to choose my war," Cale said, "and I get to choose who I fight for." He looked deep into her eyes, searching for the truth of what lay between them. It wasn't just the bond. It wasn't just the adrenaline of survival. It was the quiet moments in the freighter. It was the way she looked at him when he was covered in dirt. "I don't want a quiet planet," Kyle whispered. "I want you." Lyra let out a sob that was half laugh. She threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into her. "I was so afraid you would leave," she confessed into his hair. "I told you," Cale murmured, wrapping his arms around her, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Gravity. I am not going anywhere." He pulled back just enough to see her lips. The kiss was slow, deliberate. It wasn't the desperate, frantic collision of Vexarian. It was a vow. It was a seal on a contract written not in code, but in will. He tasted of freedom and rain. She tasted of starlight. When they broke apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his. "You realize," she said breathlessly, "that staying means dealing with the council, and the press, and my terrible mood in the mornings. I have faced down a siege mech, princess." Kyle grinned, the expression reaching his eyes. "I think I can handle your morning mood." The weeks that followed were a blur of tribunals and treaties. The trials were held in the open, in the great plaza beneath the spires. Lyra presided, not from a throne, but from a simple table. She refused to wear the heavy crown, opting for a simple circlet of silver. When Syrexa was brought forward, spitting venom and claiming divine right, the crowd roared for execution. Lyra raised a hand, silencing 10,000 people. "It is easy to kill a monster," Lyra said, her voice amplified across the plaza. "It is harder to ensure we do not become one." She sentenced Syrexa to life imprisonment on a rehabilitation colony. No martyrdom, no grand exit. Just a long, quiet life to think about her crimes. When it was Cale's turn to testify regarding Project Aegis, the plaza went deadly silent. He sat in the witness chair. He looked small in the vast open space, surrounded by the towering architecture of the aliens who had built him. He told them everything. He spoke of the pain of the bonding ritual. He spoke of the voices in his head that weren't his. He spoke of the men who had died so he could become a living weapon. It was excruciating. Lyra watched from the table, her heart aching for him. He was stripping himself bare, exposing the darkest parts of his existence to the galaxy. "I was a weapon," Cale said, his voice steady but low. "I was designed to kill on command. But a weapon does not have a conscience. A weapon does not choose to spare its enemy." He looked at the crowd. "I am not what they made me," Cale said. "I am what I do with it. And I am telling you this so that you know power without consent is not strength. It is just violence." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, a single Zalari miner in the front row stood up and clapped. Then another. Then the whole plaza. It wasn't a polite applause. It was a roar of affirmation. They weren't cheering for a weapon. They were cheering for a man who had survived hell and come back to tell the truth. In the days after, the city began to change. The hollow graffiti that used to depict Lyra as a headless doll or a puppet vanished. In its place, colorful murals of light appeared on the walls of the lower sectors. They showed a tall, radiant woman and a small, dark, armored man standing back to back, surrounded by stars. The jokes changed, too. In the taverns and the spaceports, the punchlines were no longer about tiny humans. "Did you hear about the new security protocol?" one docker would ask. "No." "What?" "Don't make the little guy angry. He throws tanks." They laughed, but there was affection in it. Kale had become a folk hero, the tiny guard who had brought the High Council to its knees without firing a shot. The coronation day was bright and cold, the winds from the upper atmosphere scrubbing the sky clean. The ceremony had been stripped of its ancient, suffocating pomp. There were no sacrifices, no oaths of eternal servitude. The doors of the palace were thrown open, allowing the public to fill the grand hall. Lyra stood at the altar. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, embroidered with the star charts of the Vexarian sector, a reminder of where the revolution began. Kale walked down the aisle. He was not lurking in the shadows. He was not walking 3 paces behind. He walked in the center. He wore a suit of ceremonial armor commissioned by Lyra herself. It was not bulky. It did not try to make him look like a Zalari giant. It was sleek, fitted to his human frame, matte black with silver inlays that matched Lyra's circlet. He wore no helmet. He stopped at the altar, standing beside her. He had to look up to meet her eyes, but the difference in height no longer looked like a weakness. It looked like a partnership between the earth and the sky. Lyra turned to the microphone. The galaxy was watching. "Citizens," she began, "we have spent centuries looking up, looking at spires, looking at councils, looking for someone big enough to solve our problems." She looked down at Kale. He smiled at her, a private, reassuring quirk of his lips. "Once," Lyra said, her voice warm with humor, "I laughed at this man. I looked at him and said, 'You are too small to be my guard.'" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, warm, knowing laughter. They remembered the story. They loved the irony. "I could not have been more wrong," Lyra continued, her hand finding Kale's. "He has taught me that size is not measured in inches but in courage. He has taught me that the smallest person in the room is often the one holding the weight of the world." She squeezed his hand. "Therefore, I do not name him my guard. I name him Kale of Etheria, co-protector of the realm, and my chosen consort." The crowd erupted. It was a sound of joy, of relief, of a future that finally made sense. Kale bowed to her, not a bow of submission, but a bow of respect. Lyra bowed back, lower than protocol allowed, meeting him halfway. The party lasted until dawn. The palace, once a fortress of silence, was alive with music and light, but Lyra and Kale had slipped away. They stood on a private balcony on the highest spire, the wind whipping at their clothes. Below them, the capital was a sea of lights. Above them, the stars were diamond-hard and endless. Lyra leaned against the railing, kicking off her uncomfortable shoes. "My feet hurt," she complained. "Being an enlightened ruler is very hard on the arches." "I told you to wear the combat boots," Kale said, leaning beside her, nursing a glass of wine he hadn't touched. "They have better support." "And ruin the line of the dress?" "Never." She looked at him. He looked handsome in the starlight, the silver inlays of his armor catching the glow of the moons. "You did well today," Lyra said softly. "You didn't look terrified at all." "I was terrified," Kyle admitted. "There were 3,000 people staring at me. I would rather fight the mech again." "Get used to it, consort," Lyra teased, bumping his shoulder with her hip. "You are famous now, the face of the new era." "Great," Kale groaned. "Does this mean I have to attend the budget meetings?" "Every single one." "And the agricultural subcommittees?" "I resign." "Denied." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Lyra looked at the height difference between them. "You know," she mused, a mischievous glint in her eyes, "if we have children, the genetics will be chaotic. They might be 7 feet tall. Or they might be compact. Kale choked on his wine. Children, we have been a couple for 4 hours. Lyra, let's survive the first week. I am just planning ahead. Strategic thinking. You taught me that. If they take after you, Kyle said, looking at her with a softness that made her heart ache. They will be trouble. Tall, loud, beautiful trouble. And if they take after you? Lyra asked, stepping closer, sliding her arms around his neck. Kyle wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her against him. The fit was perfect. It always had been. Then they will be stubborn, Kyle murmured. And they won't know when to quit. Lyra smiled, brushing her thumb along his jawline. The playfulness faded, replaced by the deep, resonant connection of two souls who had walked through fire to find each other. We have a lot of work to do, Lyra whispered. The Senate, the reforms, the resentment in the outer rim. It is going to be hard. It will be. Kyle agreed. Are you ready? Kyle looked out at the stars. He thought about the boy he had been, the weapon he was made into, and the man he had chosen to become. He looked at the vast, dangerous, beautiful empire stretching out before them. He realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of the future, because he wasn't facing it alone. Real power, Lyra murmured, following his gaze, isn't in how big you look, or how high you build your towers. It is in what you choose to protect. Kyle looked back at her, the woman who had saved him, the woman he loved. He laughed softly, a sound of pure contentment. He pulled her closer, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Then I am the most powerful man in the galaxy, Kale whispered, because guarding you was the one order I would have chosen anyway. Lyra smiled, holding him tight as the twin suns of Etheria began to crest the horizon, bringing the dawn of a new day.